He said he was just helping a friend, but the money trail told a completely different story, and it went a lot deeper than one loan. So I want to take you back to a Tuesday morning about 3 months ago. I was standing in the kitchen waiting for the kettle, scrolling through our joint account the way you do, not looking for anything, just checking. And there it was, a number that didn't quite sit right. I told myself it was nothing, closed the app, made my tea. But something in my stomach had already shifted, and no amount of tea was going to fix that. By the time I figured out what was actually going on, I realized the lie had been running for months, and it had more layers than I ever expected. To understand why any of this mattered, you need to know how Callum and I ran things. We'd been together over a decade, 3 kids, a house, the whole deal, and we had a system that genuinely worked. One joint account for everything: rent, food, kids' stuff, bills, and each of us got $25 a week into a personal account. No questions asked, spend it how you like. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fair, and I was proud of how steady we'd kept things on not a huge income. I thought we were a team. I really did. The first sign wasn't dramatic at all, then that's the thing about this kind of thing, it never is. It was just the balance looking a bit lower than I expected. Then lower again the following week. I'd check it, frown, move on. I went through the usual excuses in my head. We'd had a big shop. One of the kids needed new trainers. Maybe I'd forgotten a direct debit. There's always a reason, isn't there? You find one because you'd rather be wrong and forgetful than right and worried. I kept choosing forgetful for weeks. And then one evening, I actually sat down and went through it properly. Not a quick scroll, like a proper look month by month. And there they were, regular transfers out of the joint account into Callum's personal account. Not one, not two. A pattern. Some weeks it was 40 quid, some weeks 80, a couple of times more. Individually, they looked like pocket money almost. Added together across a few months, they were in the hundreds. My finger just stopped on the screen. Because this wasn't a forgotten direct debit. Someone had set these up deliberately. I put the phone face down on the duvet and just lay there for a minute. You know that feeling where your brain offers you all the worst options and you have to pick one to live with until you know the truth? My mind went straight to gambling, then to something worse, some subscription I didn't know about, some whole corner of his life I'd never seen. I hate that I went there, but I did, because the secrecy of it was the part that made my chest tight. It wasn't the money, it was the hiding, and I kept thinking, if it's nothing, why is it hidden? I decided I wasn't going to sit with it any longer. I waited until the kids were in bed, and I asked him, calm as I could manage, if I could see his personal bank statements, just to understand the transfers. He went very still for a second. Not the kind of still that means, of course, no problem. The kind that means he's working out what to say. He told me it was nothing, that I was overthinking, that he just used his personal account for bits and pieces. I said I just wanted to see then. Eventually, after a long pause that felt much longer than it was, he handed his phone over. I sat down and started scrolling through his statements. My hands were genuinely a little shaky. I was half braced for something ugly on some name I didn't recognize, some app, a cash withdrawal pattern. And then I found the transfers, money going out regularly in amounts that matched almost exactly what had come in from the joint account. But the name attached to them wasn't a gambling platform or an app, it was a person, a name I knew. Priya, his mate Priya. Married, well-dressed, the kind of woman whose life looks completely sorted from the outside. And I just stared at the screen going, what? Here's the thing about Priya that made this so strange. She and her husband Ross have been together for years. He's in finance, earns well, they go on proper holidays. They look comfortable in the way that people who don't have to think about money look comfortable. She's always beautifully put together, jewel tone wrap dress, glossy bob, nails done. From the outside, she is the last person on earth you'd expect to be quietly borrowing money from your husband. Which meant either things weren't as they appeared, or there was a completely different reason she was coming to Callum specifically. Once I had the statements in front of me, I could see exactly how he'd done it. He'd moved money from our joint account into his personal account first, labeled vaguely enough that it looked like his pocket money or a personal spend. Then, a day or two later, a transfer would go from his personal account to Priya. The joint account trail went cold at step 1. You'd never see Priya's name in our shared finances. It was a two-step shuffle, and without seeing both accounts side by side, it was completely invisible. I sat there tracing it with my finger, and I thought, he thought this through. This wasn't absent-minded. This was deliberate. Then I looked at the repayments, and that's where it got a different kind of awful. Priya was paying him back. I could see the money coming in, but it was coming back into his personal account, not into our joint account where it had started. It was just sitting there, quietly accumulating like a private fund he was building on the side, out of our shared money during a period when our household account had gone overdrawn more than once. I looked at the joint account and then at his personal account, and I had to put the phone down for a second, because those were two very different stories. Because I remembered those overdrafts. At the time, I'd been embarrassed and a bit baffled, like we weren't being reckless. I knew that much. I'd put it down to a bad month, maybe two. I'd cut back on things, told myself to be more careful. I remember standing at the supermarket self-checkout once with both kids, my card declining on a $34 shop, and I'd had to take out the bag of pasta and put it back on the belt while my 8-year-old watched. I'd felt ashamed, and now I was sitting here realizing that wasn't a bad month. That was money that should have been there quietly redirected somewhere else, for someone else entirely. So I confronted him, not screaming, not crying. I just sat down across from him at the kitchen table that evening and put his phone between us, screen up, and said, "Explain this." He looked at it, looked at me, and I cannot stress how maddening this was, he leaned back in his chair, palms open, and said, "I'm just helping a friend. Priya needed some support. It's not a big deal." Like that was an answer, like helping a friend was a complete sentence that closed the conversation. He even added, almost as an afterthought, that Ross knew, that Priya's husband was fine with it. He said it like that was supposed to make me feel better. It did not make me feel better. Ross knows. Let that sit for a second. Priya's own husband apparently looked at this arrangement, his wife borrowing money from a male friend, and nodded it through. Fine. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but here's the part that was doing my head in. If Ross knew, then this was a decision two households made together, except one of those households had a wife who was completely in the dark. Ross got a conversation. I got an overdraft notification. The asymmetry was almost funny. Almost, except I was the one who'd stood at the supermarket, self-checkout 2 weeks before, kids beside me, card declined, telling myself it must be a bank error. I asked him the obvious question. If Ross earns well, and he does, I've seen their holidays, their car, their kitchen extension, and Ross knows, and Ross is apparently fine with it. Why can't Priya just borrow from her own husband? Why does it have to be Callum? Why does it have to be our joint account? He opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw went tight in that particular way it does when he's buying time, looking for a door he can't find. And then nothing, actual silence. I sat there and watched him not have an answer, and that silence told me more than anything he'd said in the last 10 minutes. Then he found his door, just not the one I was expecting. He looked up from the table and he said, I'm quoting directly here, "Well, you don't see your friends very often, do you?" Not a question, a statement, delivered with just enough of a smirk to let me know it was intentional. I blinked. I actually blinked because for a second my brain refused to process how we'd gone from "why does Priya borrow from you" to "drift is a bit of a loner." He was pivoting. He was taking the question I'd cornered him with and lobbing it back at me as a character flaw. And the horrible, clever thing about it was, for about half a second, I almost followed him there. I didn't follow him there, but I noticed, and once I noticed, I couldn't unnotice, because it wasn't the first time he'd used that line. There'd been other arguments, smaller ones, arguments about nothing I'd even been able to name at the time, and he'd brought up my social life then too. How I don't go out much, how I'm not close with a lot of people. It was never relevant to what we were actually fighting about. It was just there. Reliable as a fire exit. And I sat there at that table thinking, how long has he been keeping dipping that in his pocket? And more importantly, what else has he been keeping? I told myself that night that I had the whole picture. Priya, the loans, the shell game through his personal account, the overdrafts. I had it, I understood it, I knew what had happened. That's what I told myself. I made a cup of tea, I didn't drink, put the kids to bed, and came back to the kitchen table with the printed statements I'd requested earlier in the week, I was just going to organize them, file them, be methodical about it. And then I flipped back to the older pages, the ones from 8-9 months ago, and something on the second sheet made me stop. Not Priya's name this time, a different name. 2 names, that's what I was looking at. Brid, his sister, and Maureen, his mum. Regular transfers, not huge but consistent, going back the better part of a year. Here's the thing about that. At some point, not long after we'd set up the joint account, Callum had looked me in the eye and told me he didn't send money to his family, that he wasn't in a position to, and that it wasn't something he was doing. I had believed him completely, without question, because why would I question it? So I sat there at midnight with a statement showing me the thing I'd been told wasn't happening, and I had that very specific feeling, you might know it, where the floor doesn't drop out from under you, it just quietly isn't there anymore. I want to be clear about something, because it matters. Maureen, his mum, I have always liked her. She is a small white-haired woman who keeps her reading glasses on a chain and makes strong tea and has never been anything but kind to me. If Callum had come to me and said, I want to send Mum a bit each month, I would have said yes. We would have figured it out. That's not the part that hurt. The part that hurt was that he looked me in the face and said he wasn't doing it, and then did it anyway. I don't know why he felt he had to lie about it. Maybe he thought I'd say no. Maybe he just didn't want the conversation. But he made that choice, and now here we were. So I did what you do when the room stops making sense. I got a notepad, I made a list, transfers to Priya via the personal account, ticked. Repayments from Priya returning to his personal account, not the joint pot, ticked. Transfers to Brid, ticked. Transfers to Maureen, ticked. Repeated overdrafts on the joint account during the same period, ticked. I didn't put numbers on it yet. I wasn't ready for the number yet. But looking at it laid out in my own handwriting, item by item, this wasn't a lapse. This wasn't absent-mindedness or a miscommunication or a couple of things that got out of hand. This was a system. Somebody had built a system, and I had been living inside it without knowing. The other thing I hadn't mentioned yet, and this is the detail that made the whole pattern feel even more deliberate, is that I had been asking Callum for months if we could try couples counseling. Not because of this, I didn't know about this yet, just because things had felt distant and I wanted us to actually talk to someone. And every time I brought it up, he'd say, yeah, sure, let's sort it. And then nothing would happen. I'd text him a name of a therapist, read, I'd bring it up again over dinner. Yeah, we should. And then nothing. I'd told myself he was just busy, just passive about it. Sitting there with those statements in front of me, I started wondering if busy was covering for something else entirely. I gave it one more try. The next morning, I came to him calmly. No list, no phone, no statements, just me sitting down and saying, I need you to talk to me about this. Not the logistics of it, not who knew what, just why. Why this way? Why hidden? Why not tell me? And he got irritated. Not defensive, not remorseful. That got irritated, like I was a meeting he hadn't asked to be in. He did the same pivot, brought up my friends again, said I was making it a bigger deal than it is, said Priya was going through something and he was trying to be supportive. Never once did he say the word sorry. Never once did he look at me and acknowledge that hiding it, all of it for months, was the actual problem. He just wanted the conversation to be over, and I finally stopped trying to have it his way. And then I sat down with a calculator, not because I needed the drama of a big number, I just needed to know what I was actually looking at. I added up every repayment Priya had sent back to Callum over the past several months. None of it had ever touched the joint account. It had just sat there in his personal account, quietly accumulating. The figure I wrote down wasn't life-changing money, but it was ours. Money that had started in our shared pot, moved through his hands, and never came home. He hadn't just been helping a friend, he'd been building himself a private float. And I sat with that for a long moment before I wrote the next thing down. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't being insane, not to gossip. Oh, I genuinely needed a second pair of eyes on this before I decided anything. So I called my friend on a video call, walked her through the basics, showed her the account trail on my phone. She didn't say anything for about 3 full seconds. Then she looked straight into the camera and said, "He did what?" And honestly, that was the reset I needed. Because when you've been in something for long enough, you start wondering if you're the one making it weird. Her face told me I wasn't. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a financial advisor, someone I'd seen once a few years back about our pension contributions, so I already had her number. The second was to a solicitor. I want to be clear, I wasn't calling the solicitor because I decided to leave. I was calling her because I needed to understand what our joint account meant legally, what his personal account meant legally, and what protections I had on money that had been moved out of our shared finances without my knowledge or consent. Knowing your rights isn't the same as using them, but not knowing them had already cost me enough. I printed everything, every transfer, every repayment, the overdraft notifications, the dates. I put them in order in a plastic folder, the kind you'd use for a school project, and I set it on the kitchen table face up before I called Callum in. No preamble, no warm-up. I just sat down and said, "I need you to sit with me for a minute." He came in, saw the papers, and his face did something I'd never quite seen it do before. Not anger, not denial, more like the moment when you know the room you've walked into is different from the one you left. He sat, and for once, he didn't immediately say anything. I told him what I needed, not what I wanted. I was past wanting anything to be a certain way. I told him every repayment sitting in his personal account goes back into the joint account with a date. Full visibility on both accounts going forward, shared access, no more routing anything through personal. And a counseling appointment, booked, confirmed, with an actual date within 2 weeks. I also told him that I'd spoken to a solicitor and that I understood what our legal position was. I didn't wave it like a threat. I just said it quietly. The way you say something you already know is true. The 3 things were simple, and I needed all 3. He didn't argue. That was the thing that surprised me most. Not that he agreed, but that the argument wasn't in him this time, and the deflection, the pivot to my social life, the palms up, what's the big deal? None of it came. He looked at the papers, and then he looked at me, and he said, "Okay, just that." And I watched his face for something, his remorse, relief, calculation, and I honestly couldn't tell you which one it was. Maybe all 3. He wasn't broken by it. He was just caught. And caught but agreeing is not the same as understanding why it was wrong. That part I knew was going to take longer. What I kept coming back to, like in the days after, was this. The money itself wasn't the thing that broke something in me. We could repay the overdraft. We could rebuild the buffer. Money moves. That's what money does. What didn't move so easily was the image of him deciding again and again across months that hiding it was preferable to telling me. Not once, not a slip. A system. He'd thought about it enough to route it carefully, to make it look like ordinary personal spending, to say nothing when I mentioned the account was lower than expected. That kind of hiding takes effort, and the effort is what tells you what someone actually thinks of you. I don't know yet if the marriage survives this. I genuinely don't. We're in counseling, but the appointment was booked on day 12, which he knows I clocked, and some sessions feel like movement and some feel like weather. What I know is this. I will not be reasoned out of what I found. I will not be redirected back to my own social life every time a hard question gets asked. And I will not manage the discomfort of someone else's deception by making myself smaller so they don't have to feel it. I found a thing that was real. I named it. I documented it. I stayed in the room. Whatever comes next, that part is done right. So, who's the asshole? Look, it was never really about the amount. The Priya loans could have been explained. Helping his mom and sister? Fine, genuinely fine, if he'd just said so, but he didn't say so. He moved money, covered the trail, pocketed the returns, and when he got caught, his first move was to make it about her. Every single layer was a choice, and every choice was the same choice. Hide it. You can like Callum, you can feel some sympathy for whatever complicated thing was going on with Priya, but the answer to who's the asshole here is not actually close. Thank you for sitting with this one. It was a lot, and you stayed. If you want more of this, there are new stories going up regularly, so hit subscribe so you don't miss them. And if you're looking for something to wear while you process the audacity of some people, the Drifts World store is linked below. Everyday pieces, nothing loud, just good. Go have a look. I'll see you in the comments. And genuinely tell me, would you have stayed, or was this the point of no return for you? She gave him an ultimatum and documented everything, it says, but would you have stayed? Or was this the point of no return? Tell me in the comments.